Okay, here, it's back. Oh, it is back now. Dr. Remy.
Okay.
It's good if you could put the video on so that we can understand. Please. Okay. Maybe you could turn your camera gallery so that we can see. On. Yes, please, Dr. Remy. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. What I have here is basically my slide. Pretty much just a little just a little report about what we have been doing in collaborative research. Prof. Eva and Mel Tripura. No, yeah.
It's not indigenous on this side.
And so forth. This is trying to engage with the government and working with civil society, really to push the frontier. I think in a way trying to make ourselves really relevant in our research, make it relevant to the society at large. I must just say that it's not just to receive or to accept. Let us know to just satisfying journey. Today is the 25th, the 27th of this month. Recommendations. Reports is being presented in Sarawak. So I'm happy to receive the views today. Yeah. Other the interdisciplinary center, of course, we have work researchers who are not only just talking about anthropology, people from built environment, maybe looking at one of the things that they have been doing in the center indigenous weaving and getting connected with the community themselves and marketing but rather so that there's a direct benefit to them. Yeah. So Of course, that's also a very important area. For me, as having come from the legal background, I just talk about and to work alongside with now the challenges that we face, we've already talked about. Should they be the ones who have all the when we look at the criteria as to who is eligible, we are also wary of politically sensitive issues. It will not become a hurdle in our research. This indigenous research. Building expertise in and working with indigenous knowledge must be needs to be done or to be seen that needs to be done with the stakeholders who are affected by the policy. All students who come to us. We have only in the law faculty, and we try to encourage of use, as it were, for as a legal, as a law faculty, we see the critical role of the courts to train the people in the bar, to educate the bench the way we are not able to speak to the judges. In our subject or as a course, we hope that we train the members of the bar to be able to have an awareness that they will be able to we have been privileged also to have even give seminars to the judges for an understanding of indigenous, the place of indigenous law. Right. So, and that is fun to them. And so much of for the people who matter, who will be helped by your writing. But I think when it's most important that indigenous people themselves must be instrumental in promoting understanding of legal traditions. And they need to unlearn the language and the legacy of conquest, where we see it spoken about, even in the case law. I think to be able to unlearn some that I have been emphasizing to my friends is that there is also too, too often we see researchers going. It is heartening to see that at least in Malaysia we're talking about we implement and we try to emphasize but it is just what we are trying to employ in that sector. As has already been mentioned by many our legal traditions is central to our identity. Now, incorporation of traditional laws into the system, we still have judges who look for written law. It is valid. In fact, we have a case recently. Uh, the federal court, one of the judges, the main judges, yes, they do recognize that there are systems because it is not codified and it's not written. Uh, explain, explain what for us. Yeah. So that's our journey. Maybe just before I end this, I just want to say that October of last year, it's written or rather published by the kind of indigenous things, laws that we are dealing with. It covers that. It covers the question of identity, uh, writers, anthropologists, and lawyers, and there's at least one by. So we continue to face those challenges and it will become a part of um, indigenous peoples. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bulan, for that um, very informative talk about the different avenues, no, for research on customary law, and also for giving us very positive news about how customary law can be adopted or supported by the government. I mean, I think yesterday or for most of the seminar, we've been hearing a lot of this news about governments not wanting to support, indigenous people. But we see, at least in the case of Malaysia, how the government is engaging academics and civil society groups and indigenous peoples in furthering their cause, no? So for now, we have just one question over Zoom, and that is from Ray Ariel Belisario. He's faculty at the Department of Sociology and Social Science in Bukidnon State University and is currently pursuing his master's degree in Xavier University. He's asking, I am currently writing my study about indigenous peoples that deals with child marriage. Would you have studies published that talks about indigenous cultures and child marriage?
I have one of my colleagues actually, one from the point of view of Islamic but looking at it as get those things to you, or you can contact me. I can try and,
Okay, thank you for that. But also for the benefit of the people here in Baguio, can you please show again your book? Because you were not able to see it. Only the people on Zoom were able to see the book. So can you show us what it looks like? It's a very colorful book. I saw it from the Zoom.
yeah, this is you can get it online actually. So you can actually that's logo of our sisters. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you
Okay.
for that. Are there any other questions from the people in Baguio on site? Any new questions from Zoom? Okay, so it doesn't seem like there are any other questions. And with that, I would like to thank Professor Doctor. Ah, yes, there's one more. We have one question here. Oops.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for your really, really substantial ground based presentation. And this it has really enriched our knowledge also, especially from Malaysia. I just have a two reflection. One thing is, as you said, once you had the dean who are more indigenous friendly, that brought a drastic change in the university. I just would like to share my own experience that in the university where I work partly, we also had that experience because of the present dean who was my supervisor of my PhD, because his lenses for the importance of indigenous issues changes a lot of setup for bringing this indigenous education and development course for master's degree. So just to share my thoughts, like how important it is to have that lens within the academic institution and beyond the boundaries, no? So we need more indigenous friendly champions in different sectors. That is just to share my thoughts. Then another part going in my head was, I think it was very remarkable thoughts to come up that provision of customary laws is being in your constitution. I think this is very, very rare. When I compare our own constitution, although the constitution has acknowledged indigenous, practices, but not part of the legal laws. So this is, you are really advanced ahead. However, when I hear the stories from other friends in Malaysia, a lot of issues of eviction, even, a lot of indigenous issues is there that you have well presented in your challenges. And also one of the challenges you have presented that how a customary institution be, as a legal entity, despite having the provision within the constitution of Malaysia. So how do you foresee as a legal students, as a academician, and also with these issues that you have also presented that sensitization awareness is needed, but is that enough, or is there kind of other issues for bringing the dominant mindset of decision makers that to accept that the bottom line of customer institution that has been presented in so far the domain to bring on the same table of recognition. That question I have for you. And just to share that in my country, in Nepal, that we have in the constitution of Nepal give a provision of community laws, operational act 2017 give a provision of developing our own local laws within. So this has given a lot of ample opportunities for many indigenous people. We have CIPRED has already started giving the technical supports for start legalizing our customary institution, customary laws as an equal, having an equal status as a legal entity. So just to share that thought, despite so many challenges, but the journey already started. Yeah, looking forward to hearing from, but very, very thoughtful question. I would, your presentation, I really enjoyed. And I'm looking forward to reading your books also. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pasek. Yeah, it's true. What ought to be doesn't necessarily be. To enforce some of these things. Yes, it's true that a lot of resources to do that. Yes, more need to be done, even though the law is positive. To put it not so kindly, we have limited the law, even though it may be there, but because they're not really exposed. Recent years, there have been decisions that when who understand this social reality, not the written law. Yeah. And our problem is they will say unless for us. And let me just say just one last comment. In terms of the academic institution, in the early days when I started to write for promotion, the comment that came back was, this is not this is not really legal scholarship. And now it will be quite different. The emphasis on interdisciplinary research is strong. So that research actually now is accepted as being a full research. Yeah, from that thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. We also have a quick question from our dear professor, Suri Chai.
Thank you, Dr. Rami Bulan. I feel, although we have not met yet, but your talk, your presentation, make me feel we are quite close, or coming close, connected. Yes, yes. So I was attracted by your pushing frontiers together. Pushing frontier is not only to be done alone, but you use the word pushing collaborative frontier. So in that sense, I would like to ask you a question. You talk about blinkers. You are not alone. Malaysia is not alone. Yeah. But anyway, the issue is that we live in some formal structures that have been more imprisonment to our existence than a liberating or a helpful environment. But now I felt a bit more empowering after listening to you. So how can we see this empowering process in the light of defining, what are the possible things that you can imagine of pushing the frontier together? May I mention the context of, say, ASEAN, okay? The context of ASEAN, the context of Dr. Pasang mentioned about global discussion, and you also mentioned it very well. But I'm interested in the cross-regional exchange, like South Asia, Southeast Asia too. How can we see this as just a synergic opportunity to look forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Frontiers, it's never one person doing or one creating awareness was something that we started with. Just creating awareness really well, I think. Creating awareness, engaging with the government, engaging with people who are influencing policy to try to get to that place. Years ago, I was giving a paper in the main presenters was talking about recognize traditional, basically talking about this the traditional system. just economic, and we need to have yes, I think that there must be this cost of someone there needs to be again talk and creating awareness because ASEAN is the home of governance and traditional communities that are there. Yeah. I don't and then get into places where the political formation. I have colleagues who are to be the voice. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Helen, did you want to? We have a couple more questions for you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Rami, and thank you so much for your presentation. My question actually has been, I think it was also asked by Pasang, but it's in conjunction to what Dr. Pasang has asked about the incorporation of customary law into legal systems. I want to ask what your thoughts are about the risks of doing this, because there are also instances where indigenous people's customary laws are written and coded and then were eventually used against indigenous people. So what are your thoughts about this, and what are the pros and cons? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a very real issue. And in fact, just last week, it's a double-edged sword in many ways because we want one or two cases where the court they cannot be transferred or blame by the purpose and so it brings the issue of frozen right. You know, you want to freeze indigenous people still maybe in Australia and Canada they talk about the rights and so you must have that is the only one that is allowed by customs. Indigenous systems as as the society grows, as society grows, customs grow to them. And that's like again, I think And must point out, get an awareness that we're not just a frozen people. Yeah, we grow. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that question, for that answer. No? And with that, I think we need to end this session. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Bulan, for your insightful lecture and very comprehensive answers to the questions. Okay, so now we move on to the next paper, which will be, and the speaker will be in the most important speaker though, will be introduced by my colleague, Fanny.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good rainy afternoon to all. We have, as mentioned by Ray, I think we're saving the best for last, is it? Okay, so I'm here to introduce our next speaker. Of course, our next speaker, Dr. Raimundo Revillos, is a professor of history at the College of Social Sciences, University of the Philippines, Baguio. He is a scholar of a wide range of disciplinary and interdisciplinary fields such as Cordillera history, ethnohistory of the Tingans and the Itnegs, Indigenous Peoples Studies and Development Studies, and he served as Dean of the College of Social Sciences from 2005 to 2011, and also served as the Chancellor of UP Baguio for 3 terms, and that's from 2012 to 2021. So under his leadership, UP Baguio realized its vision to be a premier university in the North, particularly in the arts and sciences. He has positioned UP Baguio as the leader in Indigenous studies and sustainability in science. His commitment and dedication to excellence in higher education has been recognized by local, national, and international bodies. He received numerous awards and citations, international, national, and local. And we can go on and on with the list, the long list of awards and citations, but with the indulgence and in the interest of time, I'll skip that. Dr. Revillos has gone beyond the pursuit of academic excellence and has in fact crossed over to more creative pursuits. There are many reasons why he's called by his UP Baguio colleagues by many names: a creative activist, a creative multiplier, and a creative impresario. Among these are his efforts to help Baguio become the creative city that it is now. He was the lead author of the city's application to the United Nations Creative Cities Network in 2017, a co-founder of the Baguio Arts and Crafts Collective, and currently its president. He also conceptualized the Mandeco Quito Artisanal Fair, which was a timely response to help local crafters and artisans during the pandemic. Dr. Revillos is also the designated co-chair of Mayor Benjamin Magalong in the Creative Baguio City Council. Visionary, socially engaged, transformative, these embody the leadership of Dr. Revillos. Because of these attributes, he continues to inspire and enable the students and youth, not only in the home city of Baguio, but also throughout the country and beyond. Friends and colleagues, let's hear it from Dr. Raimundo Revillos as he talks about the future is indigenous, normative perspectives on indigenous studies. Round of applause, please.
Good afternoon. It has just been officially declared that work and classes are suspended as of 3 o'clock this afternoon. So please bear with me, stay on with me until I finish the presentation. I prepared a written a paper in the interest of time. This is supposed to be like a synthesis of the 2-day discussion, and I anticipated the issues already based on the PowerPoint presentations that we received. But as you can see, I was trying to add more ideas as I listened to you during the past 2 days. So the title is The Futures Indigenous, Normative Perspectives on Indigenous Studies. In 1987, strategic management gurus Warren Bennis and Bert Nanos had described the world we live in by an acronym, VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This scenario has triggered the rise of future studies as a field of inquiry involving systematic and explicit thinking about alternative futures. It aims to demystify the future, make possibilities for the future more known to us, and increase human control over the future. However, the field of future studies has become dominated by what Arjun Appadurai calls the ethos of probability that is characterized by big data science, risk analysis, actuarial studies, etc. This strand of future studies leverages and to a large extent exploits disruptive events like man-made and natural disasters and other forms of crisis for the purpose of gaining and maximizing profits. Appadurai correctly argues that the ethics of probability should be countered or balanced, at the very least, by the ethics of possibility, which he defines as those ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that increase the horizons of hope, that expand the field of the imagination, that produce greater equity in what I have called the capacity to aspire, and what widen the field of informed, creative, and critical citizenship. This ethics is part and parcel of transnational civil society movements, progressive democratic organizations, and in general, the politics of hope. In exploring the theme of indigenous futures, I am adopting the conceptualization of Arjun Appadurai, who tackled the theme extensively in his book, The Future as a Cultural Fact, Essays on the Global Condition, published in 2013. Appadurai argues that culture and the discipline of anthropology that deals with it have a lot to contribute to the discourses on the futures. Although he also admits that as it is, there are inherent constraints or limits to the discipline, such as its focus on the ethnographic present, on the synchronic rather than on the diachronic, or the specific the changes through time. And so he recommends that the contribution of other social science and humanities disciplines, in fact also natural sciences disciplines, is an imperative. I would hazard to argue that especially as far as indigenous peoples are concerned, the field of indigenous studies plays an important role in imagining the roles and contributions of indigenous peoples in imagining, aspiring, and anticipating the future. I employ the concepts of these concepts, vis-a-vis my 3 decades of working with indigenous communities and indigenous peoples, organizations, and NGOs. Imagining the future, we shall put the past before us. This succinct yet powerful statement is from Mr. or Attorney Moana Jackson, a Maori lawyer who unfortunately had passed away last March 2022, only last year. A Maori lawyer, activist, and prime thought leader when he delivered a message at the International Conference on Conflict Resolution, Peace Building, Sustainability Development, and Indigenous Peoples on December 6 to 8, 2000. By this statement, he certainly did not mean that indigenous peoples should be bound or fixed by and to the past, heritage, history, tradition, and not look into the future. Mr. Jackson explained that indigenous peoples and their movements should anchor their visions or imaginations of the future in the past because, and I quote, no matter how diverse our particulars are as indigenous peoples, we have two common sources, two common pasts, if you like. The first is the common fact of colonization. As indigenous peoples, we have been colonized and dispossessed in our own lands by people from other places for hundreds of years. That history persists today. Even in the lands of indigenous peoples which have now gained independence or once again self-determining, the past history of colonization still shapes many of the issues that continue to be present in the so-called developing world. The second shared history that we have is the fact of our indigenousness, the fact that we share, in spite of our linguistic differences, our different geographies, and our different technologies, a common sense of oneness with Mother Earth, a sense of kinship with our ancestors, and a view of the world which is markedly different from that of the colonizing state." Unquote. Indigenous peoples must then claim and reclaim the past as their source of empowerment to proclaim and imagine the future. Jackson ended his message by saying, and I quote, "I believe that this is the journey that indigenous peoples are embarking upon. If that happens, then when your grandchildren and my grandchildren need to address conflict in 20 to 25 years' time, they will not turn automatically to the colonizer's law as we have been taught, but will instead ask what is law, what is our law, what is our way, what is our justice as we define it. If we can help achieve that, then we will keep the past before us and we will walk into the future with confidence as self-determining indigenous peoples." End of quote. Victoria Tauri Corpus, a Kankanai Igorot, who was a former UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, in the introductory chapter of the book Reclaiming Balance, 2004, had said that, and I quote, "The basis of our own survival and development largely depends on how we maintain the balance in our relationship with each other and with our neighbors, with our territories and the rest of creation, and with the past and the future. It also depends on how we fulfill our obligations to future generations by ensuring that they will inherit a more just, humane, and ecologically sustainable world." Unquote. This statement is not merely rhetorical. Today, many indigenous communities in our four corners of the world are demonstrating how self-determined, rights-based, and sustainable development initiatives are producing palpable outcomes for the benefit of indigenous peoples. They have also demonstrated that there are viable alternatives to the hegemonic neoliberal development paradigms, as critically analyzed by Arturo Escobar in his book Territories of Difference, Places, Movements, Life, Redes. Redes is a network, a social network or social capital. In his book, Escobar has shown the possibility of a future that is based on culture, identity, rights, and social capital of indigenous peoples. Moreover, in his book and elsewhere, he has shown that the notion of a good life is marked by difference and pluralism, which he later calls the pluriverse of notions of good life. Aspiring for the future, Apadurai posits that the poor and marginalized, like indigenous peoples, should strengthen their capacity to aspire, conceived as a cultural capacity, especially among the indigenous peoples, where the future-oriented logic of development could find a natural ally and where they could find the resources required to contest and alter the conditions of poverty. The effort to strengthen the idea of aspiration as a cultural capacity can be built on Charles Taylor's path-breaking concept of recognition. In this book, Multiculturalism 1994, edited by Amy Gutman, Charles Taylor provides the philosophical and ethical foundations of the politics of difference and of multiculturalism and of collective rights vis-a-vis universal and individual rights. He grounds his arguments within the framework of liberalism or liberal democracy. He elaborates, and I quote, A society with strong collectivist goals can be liberal on this view, provided it is also capable of respecting diversity, especially when dealing with those who do not share its common goals, and provided it can offer adequate safeguards for fundamental rights. In a society that is increasingly becoming multicultural, while at the same time becoming porous, meaning its members live in the life of the diaspora, whose center is elsewhere, there has been an increasing demand for recognition. The demand there was that we let our culture defend themselves within reasonable bounds. But the further demand we are looking for at the here and now is that we all recognize the equal value of different cultures, that we do not only let them survive, but we acknowledge their worth. It is worth emphasizing here that multiculturalism is not the only normative goal of indigenous peoples' movements. There's also the political theory of interculturalism, which goes beyond simple cohabitation of respecting cultural identities from a distance. The intercultural approach facilitates dialogue between different sociocultural groups as a way to learn about and from each other and to work together for the development of society as a whole. Interculturalism is strong in the case of Latin America. During the 2013 International Workshop on Indigenous Studies co-organized by UP-Baguio's Cordillera Studies Center and TEPTABA, Professor Myrna Cunningham, a surgeon, a PhD, gave several examples on how universities address intercultural education in Latin America. She noted, and I quote, "Indigenous peoples' initiatives in relation to education have addressed a number of areas: curricular reform, respect for endogenous pedagogical teaching, the use of indigenous languages, teacher training, preparation of culturally acceptable teaching aids, and other topics. However, the core demand has been that at every level of preserving, fostering, and developing their diverse cultures, to the indigenous peoples themselves should be involved. They want to design, implement, and execute the initiatives themselves. Indeed, indigenous movements all over the world have demonstrated their collective aspirations of a better future. And I think Pasang's Dolma Sherpa sharing yesterday is a perfect testament to that. I mean, hope as the inspiration for change. In fact, theirs is a strong manifestation of the politics of hope. That hope is inspired by the past, but they do not necessarily want to restore the past as if it has been frozen in time and space. And Professor Rami Bulan just said, said this earlier. Many indigenous peoples organizations I have encountered are aware of the hurdles of their journey. Our friends from CHT, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Thailand, I'm sure also in the Philippines, have presented or realized that the indigenous communities have to build their capacities and capabilities in ways that resonate with the policy recommendations of Amartya Sen. They know that education, both in its formal and informal or non-formal forms, is a crucial factor towards their empowerment. They are combining learnings from the NGOs, CSOs, academe within the context of the indigenous knowledges, systems, and practices. I have seen this very recently in my recent fieldwork in Cotabato among the Eromanon de Manuvo that had organized themselves as a Kamal, no, as a people's organization. I have also personally observed that indigenous communities with a critical mass of capable leaders, meaning to say trained or experienced either in non-formal training or in higher education, tend to have a stronger ability to transform the culture of silence as explained by Paulo Freire, to a culture of emancipation and liberation as expounded by Paulo Freire and Franz Fanon. Relatedly, in recent years, there's been a lot more spaces given to the process of indigenous peoples grieving, healing, recovery, rebuilding towards empowerment. What our friend Biswa Waranjan was um, accused by mentors as victimhood paradigm. Yeah, but actually, it's not victimhood for indigenous peoples. We have to acknowledge that there has to be a space for their grieving, for healing, for them to be able to recover and to rebuild, and eventually to even reconstruct. Okay, so there has been also more and more cases of self-determined, community-based, sustainable development programs in projects in many IP communities globally. These movements also share the common principle and practice of collective decision-making and consensus building, even as there is also dissensus. It's not always about consensus within IP organizations and movements. This does not mean that the victimhood phase of indigenous communities should be glossed over, because the sad reality is many IPs continue to suffer from displacement from their ancestral lands or domains, human rights violations, and poverty. But the struggles against these forms of oppression and exploitation can only be sustained by the politics of hope and the ability to aspire for a better future. And as Apadurai reminds us, capacity building is important because the capacity to aspire, like any complex cultural capacity, thrives and survives on practice, repetition, exploration, conjecture, and refutation. Where the opportunities for such conjecture and refutation in regard to the future is limited, it follows that the capacity itself remains relatively less developed. The objective really is to increase the capacity for the posture of voice, the capacity to debate, contest, inquire, and participate critically. And this has been yesterday affirmed by our speakers, like again, Pasang and the others, who really want their voices, to be heard at various levels, at the local level, national level, and even global level. Anticipating the future. Indeed, hope inspires humans to anticipate the future. This has become more significant now because the journey towards the future has become more challenging due to volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of our time. Indigenous peoples all over the world have dealt and continue to deal with risks and uncertainties, as shown in an increasing volume of literature on indigenous knowledge on disaster risk reduction, management, and response. Indigenous seers or shamans are known to have the capacity, in fact, the power to see and predict the future. Again, I had the opportunity to learn more about this during our recent fieldwork in Carmen Cotabato, wherein our friend Timuay Jojo Ambangan of the Iromanan de Manubo shared that their shaman saw images of people quarantined in their homes and villages long before the onset of the disasters COVID-19. Because of this cultural fact, indigenous communities are able to prepare for the anticipated future scenario, whether good or and mostly bad. As we know, these indigenous capacities have been relegated by Western rational scientific knowledge to the realm of the absurd and superstitious beliefs, and therefore not valid knowledge. Indigenous communities in the Cordillera have traditional village quarantine practices, such as, but not limited to, the tu'er, the prohibition of the entry of visitors in Bontoc and Kalinga, the purchos or ubaya, knotted tiger grass indicating that outsiders are not allowed to enter a particular village, and kiwil, a talisman to drive away malevolent spirits and protect people from diseases. As observed by the Mosaic Cordillera Calendar in 2022, and I quote, such knowledge and practices are predicated on the principle of mutual cooperation and collective survival. In the wider context of institution-led approaches and top-down modes of governance, as well as the increased professionalization of the field of disaster management, it is important to highlight these indigenous practices as contributions to a more people-centered and inclusive approach to disaster risk management. Indigenous peoples' knowledge systems are inclined towards the ethics of possibility, while Western's rational scientific knowledge is inclined towards the ethics of probability. The problem with the latter, ethics of probability, as observed by Michel Foucault, is, and I quote, the capillary dangers of modern regimes of diagnosis, counting and accounting. They are generally tied to the growth of a casino capitalism, which profits from catastrophe and tends to bet on disaster. This latter ethic is typically tied up with amoral forms of global capital, corrupt states, and privatized adventurism of everyday variety. I emphasize the distinction between the ethics of possibility versus the ethics of probability in order to point out the reality that there is tension, real tension between the two. The aim is not to reify the binary opposition. Rather, our aim to recognize such distinction and tension in order to explore the spaces of contact and interaction between these two ethics. As Apaduray elaborates, to be able to do this, we need to examine in a culturally informed way the zones and practices through which the ethics of informed possibility come in contact with the ethics of probability in specific regional, historical, and cultural milieus. Quo vadis, indigenous studies. Where do we go from here based on what I have discussed earlier? What are the implications? As defined and conceptualized here at UP Baguio, indigenous studies is a field of inquiry that focuses on a rigorous and respectful understanding of indigenous people's culture, rights, and development. The program employs interdisciplinary perspectives in engaging with historical and contemporary issues confronting indigenous peoples in the Philippines and elsewhere. It also seeks to valorize indigenous epistemologies or ways of knowing that have been neglected and marginalized by hegemonic scientific epistemologies. The program is at once normative and positioned because it explicitly seeks to rectify the epistemic injustice committed by hegemonic scientific epistemologies and valorize indigenous epistemologies. The articulation of the program's vision and mission implies an imagination of a future where indigenous peoples' communities live in harmony with the rest of humanity, whether they may be. The ISP, or Indigenous Studies Program, re-emphasizes the value of respectful understanding and, if I may add, recognition of indigenous peoples' cultures, rights, and development. These policies of recognition may be interpreted and implemented in different ways, depending on the context of indigenous peoples and the relationship with the respective national polities. In other words, we cannot essentialize the idea of indigenousness, indigenous peoples, and the idea of politics of recognition. While we say that the ISP is more normative, the program offers itself as a platform for a pluralist conversation on the ideal society or of the good life as imagined, aspired, and anticipated by indigenous communities. As admitted by Apaduray, we can and should bring culture back into the discourse of the futures. The discipline of anthropology should naturally lead this process, but as I said earlier, it should begin to recognize the importance of anthropology of the future to the very future of anthropology. Moreover, the academic's critical journey into the future is not just the responsibility of our colleagues in the discipline of anthropology. Indigenous studies and future studies are not just about culture. I would like to repeat that because people have this notion that indigenous studies is equal to just cultural studies or cultural studies. It is more than that. It is also about economics, politics, political economy, socio-demographics, environment, the natural sciences, etc. The issues and problems indigenous peoples or communities are so complex that it takes a whole village, literally, and figuratively, a whole academic community to join the journey. And we are not here as academe to save the IPs or the world. We cannot do that. But we can contribute by starting at home. And this is why we push for the institution of the Indigenous Studies program here at the UP Baguio in 2021. Still, we in the academe need to commit ourselves to a partisan position, at least in one regard, and that is to be mediators, facilitators, and promoters of the ethics of possibility against the ethics of probability. And how do we do this? More concretely, these are the ways forward based on our discussion during the past 2 days. These are our, in a way, our recommendations ways forward. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, it's the wrong file. Sorry. Okay. I sent a new file, but okay. I've added more specific ideas on ways of moving forward because Mrinal told me you have to give more concrete ways on how we can move forward. And so, okay, following, well, I'm a good follower also. So the first bullet that I mentioned there is that, first of all, what did I say? First, okay, that as a community of learners, we should continue to problematize, no, the concept of Asian indigenous peoples. Okay, why are we even gathered here as Asian scholars? Is there something about is there something unique about Asian indigenous peoples? There is an assumption, although not well expressed in the seminar, that yes, there is something that binds us as Asians vis-a-vis Europe and other regions of the world, and therefore we have to come together and have this conversation, not only now but also in the coming years to come. But also we are also reminded in the discussion to not to fall into the trap of essentialism, no, to get into the one size fits all kind of analysis, to acknowledge that there are different contexts and in various localities, no. Especially in Thailand, they say that they really cannot. The student who came said that the idea of indigenous peoples is really problematic in the case of Thailand because they have always been people migrating from in this cold area called Zomia, and it's really hard to delineate a certain territory as belonging to a specific group. So these things we have to prove. This is not to say that indigenous studies is diminished just because indigenous studies or indigenous peoples are contested categories, and they may not always be a universal or essentialized definition of it. It's just to acknowledge that you cannot apply certain ideas or concept anywhere else and anywhere else or universally for that matter. Second point is to provide more spaces for indigenous scholars as authors or co-authors, speakers, organizers, leaders, and managers in and out of the academe. This is very important, and I think it's very, very strong, especially in countries like Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, and now also hearing from our friend from India, the idea that only indigenous peoples can talk about indigenous issues and can speak about indigenous peoples. I think this is a powerful statement, and we acknowledge the reason for that historically. At the same time, we pose the question as to whether this runs against the idea also, or the idea of expounding the frontier, no, as mentioned earlier by the Professor Bulan and by Professor Emeritus Richay, to not to isolate indigenous studies or indigenous peoples with the other advocacies like environmental issues, climate change action, and sustainable development goals. It also is also kind of problematic because, as mentioned by Carmen Daitek Yangot earlier, she sort of echoed, no, the question of a question that can the other or the indigenous peoples, oh, how did we say that? Can we not interrogate also the voice or the interpretation or the representation of indigenous peoples themselves? So that kind of idea. Second, the third point is that there's a need to build the capacity of indigenous peoples towards their self-determined development and empowerment towards building their human capital. I think this is repeatedly said in all the presentations, given that most indigenous peoples really don't have the voice yet, the voices and the ability to articulate and to put forward their issues in policymaking bodies, like even the UN. Many of them are really simply don't have the capacity to do that, and therefore the need to build their capacity to be able to defend themselves and their territories and their rights. Okay, and I think we're saying that the academia should be able to do something about that. The need to advance indigenous epistemologies or ways of knowing through indigenous research methodologies. So this is has been a very rich field of discussion today, especially hearing from Biswa Jaran and others. The idea of advancing indigenous epistemologies through indigenous research methods and methodologies, and we've listened to many various ways of doing it. At the same time, an unsettling question was posed as to the very idea of decolonization. Does it simply mean, exorcising yourselves from colonial concepts, or does it mean localizing these concepts, or in other words, how do you deal with Western concepts that may be, in fact, be empowering and emancipating for indigenous communities? And going back to Linda Tuhiwai Smith, who was the source of this idea of decolonization, in fact, she herself says that it's not about forgetting Western concepts. She emphasizes the fact that decolonization or decolonizing research methodologies is not about xenophobia. No, she says that it's about empowering indigenous communities, making research less oppressive and less, something that will empower communities. And it could happen that certain methodologies introduced by the West or non-indigenous methodologies may be helpful towards that direction. So I hope that we continue this kind of conversation, and as academics and very influential people, maybe try to be very careful about how we define decolonization and decolonizing research if we really want to advance the empowerment of indigenous communities and build the frontiers of support and knowledge for indigenous communities, rather than to isolate them. Next, link indigenous studies and IP advocacy to other studies and advocacies like global. So this is the main point of Professor Surichai and Professor Eva Gerhards, where she advocates for global solidarity to link indigenous studies and IP advocacy to other issues like climate change, and environmental justice and human rights. In other words, to build the social capital. I think this has been done, and this Pasang and the rest are very actively engaged in this kind of thing of building the social capital of indigenous communities. But the challenge really is how that can really transcend or really be brought up to the level of the community, because there's a lot of freedom. Speaking in the United UN forums, you have the freedom to do that. Because you are in a sort of a safe space in UN caucuses perhaps, but when you go back to the communities, and when the indigenous communities talk about human rights, even the idea of human rights in indigenous communities, and I've seen this in my recent fieldwork in Palawan and Mindanao, already branch you, and you are red tagged immediately as a communist because you are talking about human rights. So that's a very, in fact, a very dangerous word for them now to use human rights as a discourse. So at the same time, you have this very robust discussion of human rights at the global level. How do you, build that bridge? Next, the need to share or give research results back to the community. I think that is something that being asked of us, the academe, repeatedly. And at the same time, I was struck by what, who said this? Pasang Sherpa, Yangji, no? I think, Pasang Yangji, who said that, yeah, it's good to give back, but we have to be cautious and be judicious about what we are sharing back because the knowledge may not always be empowering. Knowledge may not always be power in that case because if that knowledge is shared to the community, it might lead to and create more problems for them. And our friend from British Columbia University cited examples of how this can happen. So I think that the idea is to filter at various levels. Maybe you can bring back the data to the community, but talk to the elders first, talk to the leaders if this is something that can be shared to the rest of the community. Because I tell you, the collective wisdom of the elders is really, really humbling and amazing. You have to listen to them. Okay, so I think I will end with that. Those are the general recommendations. Moving forward, there might be more specific recommendations on our next steps. I believe that as engaged scholars and socially committed scholars, we will not end here, in this 2-day conference. So if there are any ideas, more concrete ones on moving forward, we are now opening the floor to discussion. Dean Vani, thank you. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Villos. May we kindly ask the audience here in Baguio if there are some questions before I go with the summary or the highlights? Yes, please. And also in Zoom, if we have some questions from our Zoom participants. Yes, please. Yes, Dr. Pasang. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon. It's not actually a question, but looking back or reflecting from all the presentations since day one, there's a concern. Yeah, of course, there's this struggle or issue of recognition, respect of indigenous peoples, indigenous studies. On the other hand, there's also this trend. I don't know, but in the Philippines, in the Cordillera Forest specifically, the young generations, are not really interested. It's not general, but in strengthening the culture or whatever culture related to economic, related to politics and all that. It's like fading, what do you call that? They are not so serious about it. So how can we address this trend? I don't know in other indigenous peoples in Asia, but in the Philippines, particular in the Cordillera, as I was also for how many decades already I'm working in the indigenous communities. So there's really a trend that the young generation now are not interested, in their culture and they are not going back to roots. If they already left the community and then they're in the cities going to study and all that, not just a few of them going back, and that they're not looking at their roots when doing their as they go on with their life's journey, something like that. There's already study on that, no? That they are not, the young generations now. So I would like, Sana, how will the academe and other groups, how will we address this? So that even uh, how intense our effort, no, to have all these researches and all that, but it will just stop in our generation. So I don't know what will happen in the future. So that's a piece of thought.
Okay, thank you for the question. It's truly valid. It's something that we recognize. In fact, in many of the sharings, and I remember some views, particularly as mentioned by Dr. Tripura earlier, looking at the in and out and understanding that, in fact, he is part of the community, but doing research would also realize and make him understand that he could also be part of some external or outside aspects, particularly on the views of education. Anyone would like to respond to that? Dr. R, yes.
Maybe that's a question that should be posed to organizers of in communities, indigenous peoples organizations, and CSOs. I know that the problem is real. But for academic institutions, no, like us, I think that's where we can. I think the Indigenous Studies program, for example, is one concrete step of addressing this. We've been getting students who are indigenous persons but who had lived in the cities for the longest time and had been kumbaga uprooted, no, from their culture. And now because of what no, the exposure, no, to the discourse in the program, there's a renewed sense of cultural appreciation and commitment, no, to do something for the community. And by the way, one of the requirements of the program is not just to publish or to produce a dissertation, but to propose or come up with a project in consultation with indigenous communities where the research findings can be used for good, no, by the community themselves. So that is our very concrete way of dealing with this issue. Maybe the others can also contribute.
I don't have an answer. But the question is very important that I cannot sit down. I have to stand up. The reason is that we in this room sure that we know the future. I follow the lead of my friend. No one really know what kind of future is coming. I'm trying to say that as long as we don't bring the sense of insecurity, of unknowing the future, to be, because you see the young ones in our country too, after COVID, many jobs are closed. Reduction of civil servants, etc., etc. So there are a lot of change in the job market and an insecure, more independent type of working, etc., etc. But my point is that we still don't know what kind of future will bring with this digital, with this new economic, under this very insecure climate. There are strong push for green, but that could be green colonialism. If we don't take everyone on board, what kind of future they would like, they will have. So in a way, may I bring the word future to be, can the future making, can future be a platform of making something together? Can future, the kind of question you say, is, we don't know what part of our culture should be really preserved. So we should not impose that. And the future, they will value, it will come certain moments in their feeling, but now they are under certain other pressures, for example. So in some way, the environment is not very enabling for us to highlight, just call for culture revival, etc. So it is against the context, but the feeling that bringing culture more at the core of our interaction. May I say I follow the feeling of the initiative that you have already started here, ISP. And the feeling that why we come here together, I feel something started back home in Chiang Mai or Pasang. We started wherever we can, whatever we can do, but we are not very sure how to move and make it attractive enough and make it enabling enough, enabling for the young people to join. And we don't know the answer that clear. So only that we can bring the spirit of the people who already decided go back. Mali met quite a few, but they are quite exceptional people. Huh? So it cannot be easily a model. They made a great decision and they have done it, but many are not successful. So a new type, a new social enterprise mode, new type of, but local economy are very necessary to be at the core of the challenges of intersectionality of these studies. So I would like to see how we learn from each other, how ISP, how you approach program, and I can bring, including this issue to be bridges to share the experiences, and maybe some of the people can also do the research in Thai, in different contexts in other country, so that we can get your advice. You see, I think we are also too much what you call insular when we talk about indigenous discussion, etc. Could it be more opening? It's opening up by force of this disaster of climate, but we are not using your word following Pandurai. Capacity building to capture the future agenda of this together. Thank you.
Pasang, then we have Helen. Oh.
Yeah, very difficult to be in the same line after very powerful reflection from Professor Suruchai. I just would like to reflect one part, very simple, experience and the ground reality, that how we bring our children. The first education starts from our home, no? How we bring our children. Like for example, I was brought up till I was 11 years. I was in the village. I hardly followed the trend of school. My mom, we had one teacher who's been hired by my mother at home, thinking because I would be educated, because my mom never got, mother and father both never got opportunity even to go to school. So I was brought up in that environment. But my mother always pushed. My mother was a great community leader. She served almost more than 25 years in the community. She was a great leader, naturally born as a leader, but she felt how important for education. So she really hired one village teacher and make sure we follow. But I was not. I was just roaming in, as I said, like here, lingering here and there. But I really enjoyed the nature. I enjoyed running in the paddy fields, fishing in the paddy field, following footsteps of my other relatives in the village. And I think that was what hooked me to the village. And then later, even when I started earning myself and started living independently, my longing to go to the root started coming up along with the journey of indigenous discourse. And a few years back, I built a house in the land where it was presented by my mom, because that connected me. So I just personally feel like how you are brought up, when you are young. So that really determines, despite the whole modern, education, which ultimately reshape our future and trapped us without any option in life. We are one of the few lucky people who have an option to go back to community. Many people, they don't have option because fear of losing the job, fear of seeing different from the society. But I think we need to bring our children not to be fair with anyone, anything. Always always live with your dignified values, no matter how you've been seen, but you just respect yourself. And as I said in my presentation, if you trust ourselves, if you respect ourselves, I think that's it, that the journey will begin to flourish your life ahead, and people start thinking you as respectful. That is part. And then this is the natural process. That is my own personal reflection, because I'm a mother of 3 children. And every time, whenever I get time, I supposed to be in the village now because of me now. But I'm really glad I'm here too, no? Every time, I'm also very with a responsibility with my now 1 foot in the university, 1 foot in the resource centers, and also other volunteer and other work, a bit occupied with the pressure of time. But no matter what, if I get more than 1 week holiday of my kids, I just close my eyes and I just go to the community and village, and my children really love enjoying. And I think this is a very, very rare. My children still now has not touched my mobile. They don't, because I brought up in that way, that they love nature, not the technology. And in school, I was given 1 speech from the parents, because most of the parents in my daughter's school said they are how to make sure like children are away from the mobile and technology. And I asked I responded, is it time for them to be familiar with the mobile? Because still now, my children are 8 years. Till now, they have not hooked with this mobile. And even I leave my mobile there, they will not touch upon. Because I brought up and I want them to be alive as possible. And I every time I have time, I bring them to the home, and I want them to play in the mud, where and go swim in the stream, and do whatever want in the nature. That's how I was brought up, and that is only values that connected me with the village, and that's how I, so I think we start from home. One thing. Then another thing is we all are here to make some changes, right? Because we never got the opportunity in school, because in school we never been respected, or our values, what we were brought up at home, were never been seen at the same way at the school, in the university same. But you and me, we are here to bring that changes in the modern educations, to be questioned, and questioned from our indigenous values and practices. And I think if we continue this momentum, sooner or later, I think our children, new generation, would love and would be proud who they are. Yeah.
I would like to share to answer the questions. Maybe years ago, for Center for Ethnic Study and Development, we have a one program about the ethnic youth volunteer. We have this program because we think that ethnic youth, most of them, they cannot access to the university, and they have to work on the farm with their parents. But how to we can empowerment them? So we have a 1 year's ethnic youth volunteer to select some of them, many communities to join with us 1 year. And we try to this every 3 months to study with us in the university, and 6 months and 4 months they return to their communities to study, to understand their community, to study their history. We think that if they understand their history, they can moving forward as far as if they understand under far away, so they can move forward far away as well. And after that, 20 years ago, some of them, they are the community leader now. And they have like a critical idea to the development, and they can, I think that they can choose which one is good for their communities. And when we open MA in ethnicity and development, at least one student, they spend time at least 3 years or 5 years, but the problems, it go forward. How can we produce the student can follow the problems? So we also have a small summer school, and nowadays I have a research on the, in Thailand, we Thai governments have a mega project to divert water from Sarawin. Sarawin is a river between Thailand and Myanmar, international rivers. And Thai government want to divert water from that area to Central Plains of Thailand. And we try to join. We work with the communities, and also we think that the youth they are very important. So we have a summer school to join between the affected communities and the youth in the general, to learn together, to study together. And this project is still going on. This is what we are doing. Yes.
Dr. Malik. Yeah, Helen? Yep.
Thank you very much for that question, Manang Jane. It's really thought-provoking. I don't have answers as well, but I would like to share that Tabdaba and UNICEF and the Department of Social Welfare and Development had a joint project a few years back on training Indigenous youth on their rights as Indigenous peoples. And one of the interesting result of that project was this question about the reluctance of the youth to really learn about culture. And we learned from different groups of focus group discussions with young people. They said, actually, we are not reluctant. It's actually the elders who are more reluctant in passing this traditional knowledge. And it was very interesting because there were moments, there were spaces of conversations between the elders and the youth. And the elders said that, yes, there's a fear and reluctance of really transmitting the knowledge because the context of Indigenous peoples for a very long time hasn't been really very, encouraging. We have national policies that are discriminating to continuing these practices. Even in school, for instance, I was talking to our friend from Thailand here, and I was sharing that when I was in primary and in secondary, we were not allowed to speak our own languages in schools. Otherwise, we have to pay 1 peso for each word that is uttered. And that's the reality for many Indigenous peoples. He was saying that that's also the same in Thailand. So what is really the question that the young people were asking was, what is the incentive, of doing all of this when you go to school and then you're not allowed to speak your language and, your practices are discriminated? It's the same educational system that has decimated and has actually taught and marginalized this culture. So, and we learned from that project that, having a safe space for conversations, more conversations between the elders and also the young people to really talk about their values, because it's not that they don't see it as valuable. It's just that I think it's also kind of process of self-preservation, so that you don't get discriminated. So and the best thing to do is just maybe keep it to yourself. So so we have local, national policies that are not very encouraging or even discriminating, and having spaces, even having spaces can address And also resources. You know, it takes a lot of energy to organize things, even at the community level, human resources, even financial resources, you know, for us to come together. So we have, for instance, schools of living traditions in the Philippines, but these are limited in the community. So how can this be replicated? How can this be multiplied in many other communities? So again, of course, these are not one size fits all, and it may not really respond comprehensively to the question, but it's also thought provoking because of the question of reluctance of young people to go back to communities or to practice their culture. So thank you.
Willie, yes. Dr. Willie, and then Dr. RR for the response to the question.
Yeah, this is a reaction to what Professor Sorichai said about not knowing the future, which we all agree, I'm sure. But then again, we can imagine the kind of future that we want, right? And we can agree on what that looks like, especially for all of us and for indigenous peoples. And this brings me to this our discussion earlier about there's a group of us discussing about how is it to decolonize, and Professor Rovillos touched on this as well, decolonizing research, for example. And I was reminded of Linda Tuhiwai Smith's Indigenous projects, which I think it started with less than 10 or 11, but now I think it has grown to 25. And some of these include claiming, protecting, revitalizing, storytelling, naming, no, the importance of naming, for example. It's not really just about using indigenous concepts in your circles in the university, but also really understanding the importance of naming, of reclaiming the history of those concepts. So it's not enough to just use a concept in your discourse, and then after that, you leave it behind, you know, just checking the box and just using it for your purposes. So it's but using all this, looking at those indigenous projects, I think there's an opening there about decolonizing research and challenging the university to engage in these indigenous projects. Of course, the way we reclaim, the way we protect has to be respectful and be cognizant of how we do things in our indigenous communities. But that also adds to a challenge to us in the academe. For example, the Indigenous Project of Protecting, that talks about protecting the land, protecting territories. And should we engage in these kinds of indigenous projects, like protecting, helping, supporting indigenous communities in their struggle to protect the land, for example, or to protect their livelihoods from attacks? But the point is, there's this wide range of opportunities for the university, for the academe to engage in and participate in creating that future that we want, especially for indigenous peoples. Yeah, thank you.
For the responses and comments shared by our guests, of course. And for, in the interest of time, I think we have one question. We have a couple of questions, but we'll address this question from Ven Paulo Valenzuela. I would like to read that. While it is true that for the longest time, indigenous knowledge was an anecdote to resilience building, I disagree to a certain extent that indigenous knowledge is being relegated by Western rational scientific knowledge in contemporary issues of global sustainability, such as climate change. And citing some activities and fora, and the call on complementation with scientific knowledge, and that there's a huge need to understand more the role of indigenous knowledge in resilience building. So the question is, how and what do you think would be the pathways onto which complementation can happen, but also safeguarding indigenous knowledge from slipping back to the shadows of scientific knowledge? RR?
Okay, the first, regarding the comment, I had to review what I wrote. And Paolo, who was a former student of mine, I think, but obtained his PhD in Japan, I did say that these indigenous knowledge systems, blah, 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 had been relegated by scientific knowledge as absurd and superstitious. So the indicative word was had been. So I acknowledge that there has been a change, of course, in paradigms, and increasingly even Western science is now acknowledging and recognizing indigenous ways of knowing as expressed in the Article J of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and recently now what you also cited, which is I'm also familiar with. And that's a good sign. No? It's a good indication that now the voice or the voices of indigenous peoples are somehow getting across the scientific dialogue with the Western scientific people. Regarding the question, I think that's a good question for dissertation, Paolo. Quite heavy. But I would like to answer by first acknowledging for mainstream institutions and especially institutions that are highly influenced by Western rational scientific paradigms to be open and to acknowledge. And the example of Attorney Rami, Professor Rami Bulan in Malaysia is a very good example of how the frontiers had opened when the faculty started listening and being open to indigenous ways of knowing, although in the realm of uh, legal pluralism. But I think there are a lot of examples how this can be done in terms of policy, in terms of practice, in terms of academic research. And maybe our colleagues who are actively engaged can also help give examples on how it can be done. So, there had been initiatives by organizations to mainstream or to adopt or to have a dialogue with indigenous knowledge in addressing issues like climate change and disaster risk reduction. And Paolo, I know you're very much into the RRM now. Maybe you know more about this, how you guys are dealing with indigenous knowledge in the context of the RRM.
For RR. I think we can accommodate 2 more questions from our Zoom participant. So we would like to request okay. From Mr. Paulo, would you like to unmute and share your question and respond to Professor RR?
No, my professor, thanks. Issues right now. So I think in terms of climate change, it is true that there is acknowledgement that this comes from aspect. So it becomes so basically they get it from traditional sources, but if the science question in a way where I tend to play around and social scientists as someone
Okay, thank you, Paolo. Yes, unfortunately, we are running out of time. Thank you for your question, Jamil question, Lisa, and of course, a comment of RV Bukaril. Rest assured that your comments and questions will be forwarded to Professor RR to respond to. Okay, so just to wrap up on the key highlights of what have been discussed, actually the long list of what Professor R mentioned, but I just want to focus on the highlights on ways of moving forward. So looking at as a community of learners, we continue to problematize Asian indigenous peoples in various contexts that we need to be cognizant about and provide more spaces for indigenous scholars in and out of the academe, build the capacity of indigenous peoples towards self-determination, development, and empowerment. So, because realizing and recognizing that not all have the ability to articulate their position and views of indigenous people's rights. Indigenous epistemologies and indigenous research methodologies, looking at decolonizing research, the link in indigenous studies and indigenous people's advocacy to other studies and advocacies as well in various disciplines, sharing and giving research findings to the community. So we give back with caution and being judicious, particularly looking at knowledge sharing. We are all here as indigenous champions, as mentioned by Dr. Pasang Dolma earlier, no? And the shared experiences of everyone, no? Both in Zoom and likewise here in our face-to-face forum. We navigate positionalities and identities, struggles and opportunities on indigenous studies, stories of success and challenges on indigenous studies and indigenous peoples in Asia have been at the forefront of how indigenous peoples and indigenous studies and indigenous peoples education will move forward. So with that, I think we have to end the program, but I pass the mic to to some announcements and activities. So we need to have a photo. Can we invite everyone? Yeah.
Right. So we're now, of course, this is the end of our 2 day seminar. But I would like to officially, of course, thank everyone who made this possible. Of course, the Indigenous Studies program was allowed, no, to host this. And of course, thank you to UP Baguio and of course to the College of Social Sciences, Dean Leia, for supporting us in this endeavor. Of course, our partners in this event, we would like, of course, to acknowledge again Malaya Foundation Incorporated and Tebteba, no, for helping us, of course, making it really possible, our co-organizers for this event. And then, of course, thank you to all the individuals who assisted in making this event maybe not as smoothly as we imagined it to be, but we still reached this point. Thank you to the moderators. I will not be able to individually call out your names, but you have your certificates. Please make sure that you get them from the secretariat. And of course, our resource persons, no? Yes, definitely. This venue was, of course, the goal of this event is to make sure that we are able to discuss. It's a venue for self-reflexivity, for discourse, for more questions, even the more difficult questions. And I think we were able to achieve that. And I guess the challenge now, as mentioned by Prof. RR a while back, the importance of hope, no? Will keep us afloat. Yeah, you know, as hope will, as it sounds cliche, but truly, hope springs eternal. And so we continue to continue with our work and do it well, no? And of course, I hope we continue to be inspired, even with the challenges, the many challenges that were mentioned by our speakers. And so with that, thank you so much. And of course, no, we will not forget, no, the important role of our secretariat, of course, Kili, yeah. And of course, our system network office. We know that it was not completely perfect, but since we made it here, of course, we will not be able to do the hybrid, even if, let's say, it's still, you know, it will still require improvement, yeah. But yeah, I think at least we're there. No, we are able to combine both those who are physically here and those in the hybrid or in the virtual room. Again. All right. So thank you. So to end this, May I pass? Yeah, Pasang has a special request. And then after that, let's proceed with a quick photo so that, we memorialize or something. We make, yeah. Come again? Dinleya. Yes, Dinleya. Pasang has a special request. Right. Yeah, I met Leah, I think 2009. When so grateful to meet her as a dean, and I'm so thankful. I just brought a small souvenir for her. So I just glad to hand over. And for hosting us, and for the University of Philippines, yeah, and Baguio.
Share that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
colleague.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. And I also have a small gift for all the hard work for Arara. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. All the hard work. And thank you so much. And
Thank you also to Mali, who gave also a gift for the university and for the program. This is not to pressure the rest of our guests, but I think your presence was a gift enough. Okay.
this
But we still
present,
have until tomorrow, though.
present on behalf of us, all of us. So thank you so much. We really had a wonderful time. Thank you.
Thank you. May we invite everyone? Do we stay in front? Okay. Yes. Can we invite all the participants here? And perhaps we can even turn on the Zoom gallery. Could we do that? The chairs.
Yes, please include us in the group photo.